Hey everybody, I'm Howard, and this is Otto's Retirement Corner. So the last video I did was about Social Security and kind of the results for 2024, what money came in, what money came out, what money the trust fund provided, and the trust fund balance. So one of my viewers pointed out, that one of the big problems with the trust fund is that if you take this interest income that comes from the trust fund and you divide it by how much is in the trust fund, it shows that the trust fund is receiving about 2.5% interest on their investments in treasury securities. It's not exactly that, but 2.5 is close enough. So why is that important? And the reason it's important is because over the years, the trust fund has, as required by law, invested all their money into treasury securities, which, while they're the safest investment in the world, is also one of the lowest paying investments in the world. And the reason they do this is they didn't want to mess with the money in the trust fund and risk it any more than they had to. And, in the financial world, treasuries are considered risk-free. So, you get the good, they're not going to lose money. With the bad, the return is very poor. And my viewer, what do you mean, is his name, or her name, I don't know, pointed out that that's one of the reasons why the trust fund is not as much as it is, and why in the future it's going to struggle to provide the return that the Social Security Administration needs. So let's talk about something here. This is kind of my solution. Do you like how I turn around? I can do that again. This is my solution to save the trust fund, or going forward to make the trust fund healthier. I won't say save the trust fund, but going healthier. Bear with me here. I'm going to erase. This is what they call dead air in media. Okay, so here's my solution. I'm going to call it the 3-bucket strategy. And everybody should be aware of what the 3-bucket strategy is. It's one of the investment strategies for retirees. And typically, you got bucket 1, bucket 2, and as advertised, bucket 3. All right, so typically, what this is a way to invest your money to provide for your future retirement years. And typically in bucket 1, you would have cash. And that may be, 2 to 5 years worth. In bucket 2, and what we're trying to do here is aim for, okay, this is my need in the next 2 and 5 years. This is my intermediate need. So I might have bonds in here or dividend stocks. And this might provide for, the intermediate 5 to 10 years. And then in bucket 3, you would typically have growth stocks or more aggressive, riskier investments. And this is for 10 years plus of your retirement. So those are the 3 buckets. There's some variation on this. There's some differences you'll find in different plans, but that's the 3-bucket strategy, and that's the way to make your portfolio survive for your entire life. Well, in the same respect, we want to have the Social Security Trust Fund survive for the rest of everybody's lives. And the way it is now, unless something changes, the prediction is that within about 8 years, maybe even less, depending upon how things fall out, that trust fund will disappear and will no longer be able to pay full benefits, and it will be cut, 20, 23%, something like that. It could vary. The estimate will change every year as we get more information. So how do we save the trust fund? So my suggestion is we use a bucket strategy. But this bucket strategy doesn't work until we solidify the trust fund. Because right now, with 8 years left, you don't want to put that trust fund money anywhere else other than treasury securities, because you can't guarantee a return better than treasury securities over those next 8 years. And even if you did, instead of that 2.5%, if you were able to find 3 or 3.5%, it might not be enough to save the trust fund, because right now it's at a shortage of about 103 billion for last year, and that's going to grow. It's going to be 200, 300 billion a year as we get out to year 7 and 8. And you know, the trust fund sinks, and even if the return's higher, there's not enough trust fund there to have a return enough to save it. So my first suggestion is we raise the FICA tax. Right now, employees are paying 6.2, corporations are paying the other 6.2 unless you're self-employed, and then you pay the whole 12.4%. My suggestion is that corporations, I'm not talking about sole proprietors, but corporations go from 6.2% to 9.3%, or a 50% increase on what they're paying, and that's it. So right now, corporations pay about 500 billion. It may be a little more than that. I'm extrapolating from some other information here. The SSA does not give out this information, but I'm looking at how much total taxes get paid into it. The estimate that about 10% of people are self-employed, and I play around with some numbers, and I get about 500 billion. It's probably a little more than that, but I get about 500 billion. So my suggestion to raise this, we would get another $250 billion a year from corporations. What does that do? Well, right now we're at negative 103 billion. So this not only pays for current and growing obligations of the Social Security Trust Fund, but it gives us some padding. It allows us to take that 2.5 trillion we have in the trust fund now and build it up. And while we're building it up, we do some different things with it. So right now, bucket number one will be FICA, or payroll taxes. Right now, it's paying about 92% of benefits. You know, that'll drop and drop and drop until, you know, it hits about 80% in 2033. So that's our bucket number one. That's our safe bucket. We're not doing anything with that money. That's incoming money that will pay for this, okay? And that's before we change this. So bucket number two continues to be treasury bonds. You know, as an individual investor, that might not be your bucket number one, but for Social Security, it's bucket number two. And, you know, right now, new investments for the Social Security Administration are getting 4.5%. So while we're getting 2.5% now because interest rates have been so low for so many years, since interest rates have gone up the last couple years, that's what the new rate is that the SSA gets from the Treasury. All right, so here's bucket three, here's the controversial one, and I'm going to say the word that everybody hates, and it's called privatization. And that means different things to different people. Most people respond saying, okay, that means we're giving all the money to Wall Street and the hedge funds and the billionaires, and they're going to take it and invest it, and they're going to make a huge amount of money off of it because there'll be trillions of dollars to invest, and they'll make billions of dollars. Doesn't have to happen that way. That's not what that word has to mean. And my suggestion is that we take about 15 billion a month and we invested in stocks. And when I say we invested in stocks, we invested in ETFs, or you can use, mutual funds, but an ETF like VTI. VTI is an all U.S. stock fund. It invests in every single stock in the U.S. market. So we don't give it to somebody and say, manage this money. We do very passive investments, and it doesn't have to be just VTI. My thought is you would, go out to the investment world and say, hey, who wants to bid on this for a fund that includes all stocks? Fidelity, this is Vanguard's, Fidelity has one, Schwab has one, there's all sorts of banks have them, all sorts of investment companies have them. We split it up, it doesn't have to be one, it could be 5, 8, 10, doesn't matter. And we say we're going to pay you a very low, instead of 3 basis points or 0.3%, we're going to pay you 0.1% or 0.5% of a percent. So, what will they make on this? Over time there will be, 15 billion, a month, you get 180 billion a year. And we build this up until it's a half of the trust fund. And that's going to vary how much that could be. And it could take 6, 8, 10 years until that happens. Is it 1.8 trillion? And when the trust fund hits 3.6 trillion, maybe that's it. And we just keep managing that fund so that the trust fund has half of their investments now in stocks. And over time, this won't help us in 5, 6, 8 years before the trust fund goes out, which is why we have to raise taxes. But now we have something earning 8, 10, 12% a year for lifetime. So I understand this is controversial. It doesn't have to be. This can be very passive. Okay, maybe the investment companies make $1 billion a year off of that, or 500 million. It's peanuts compared to the amount of money we have here. And at first there'll be a little bit of a shock to stocks. As soon as this would be announced, stocks would shoot up, but it's not a whole lot of money. You're talking about a $50+ trillion stock market, and you're talking about 15 billion a month. It's not a huge amount, but over time this will build up. It'll also grow, so it might not take 10 years to get 1.8 trillion. With growth, that could that 1.8 trillion or half of the trust fund, that could be 5, 6 years from now. That's my idea. Tell me what you think. Certainly, I'm going to advertise this as very controversial, and it is, because when you say privatization, it scares people. You got this tax on corporations. What do corporations do when they're taxed? They raise prices. But keep in mind, corporations a few years ago were paying 35% of their income in taxes. That dropped down to 21%. Now they're talking about 15%. So, in this new bill, this great big bill, corporations dropped to 15%. That may change. It may be something different than that. But when they get that savings, this doesn't hurt them as much. So will they raise prices? Possibly. They may look at it as, we get a net benefit. Our income taxes went down, our payroll taxes went up a little bit, we're still coming out ahead. Do we need to raise prices? Maybe. It won't be huge. It'll be a fraction of a percent of inflation if that does happen, but it could. So give me your comments, give me your questions, give me your plans. Tell me what you think of this, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye. Thanks.